The Star Wars saga frames victory as an explosion of light that banishes darkness in a single decisive moment. Yet beneath the spectacle, there is a quieter and more unsettling truth. Every heroic triumph shatters an existing order without resolving the deeper question of what comes next, and the galaxy is repeatedly left standing in the ruins of a system that once held everything together, however cruel and compromised it may have been. When the Death Star explodes or a Sith Lord falls, the narrative presents it as liberation. But liberation without structure is not stability. The Empire functioned as a central nervous system for a sprawling civilization, controlling trade routes, security fleets, communication relays, and bureaucratic coordination. And when that system is ripped out in an instant, the galaxy does not inhale freedom. It convulses. The immediate aftermath of victory is not peace, but absence. An absence of authority that once dictated movement, law, and consequence. Planets that relied on imperial logistics suddenly lose supply chains for food, fuel, and medicine. Local governments that had been subsumed or weakened find themselves unable to respond, and entire sectors drift into paralysis as coordination collapses. The saga rarely lingers on this moment because it complicates the fantasy, yet history within the galaxy makes it unavoidable. The fall of a regime creates a vacuum, and vacuums are not empty spaces waiting patiently for hope. They are violent pressures that pull in whatever force is closest and strongest, regardless of morality. In many systems, the Empire was the only thing preventing neighbouring rivals from open conflict. Its presence froze old grudges under the weight of fear, and once that fear evaporates, those grudges thaw instantly. Border disputes ignite, old wars resume, and the galaxy fragments into 1,000 local conflicts that never reach the attention of the heroes who already believe the war is over. The destruction of centralized fleets leaves hyperspace lanes vulnerable. Piracy surges almost immediately. Smugglers and criminal syndicates expand from the shadows into the open. And worlds that once feared stormtroopers now beg for any force capable of providing protection, even if that protection comes at the cost of exploitation and violence. This is the contradiction at the heart of heroic victory. The heroes win by removing the villain, not by constructing a replacement for the system that villain controlled. Luke Skywalker destroys the Emperor, but does not remain to build a new Jedi-mediated political order. Anakin ends the Sith, but leaves no framework to guide the Republic forward. Rey defeats Palpatine, yet inherits a galaxy with no clear governing spine. These characters are warriors and symbols, not administrators. Their journeys are inward and mythic, rather than institutional. And the saga consistently treats governance as something that will simply resolve itself once evil is defeated, a comforting assumption that collapses under even minimal scrutiny. The Empire's oppression was brutal, but it was also predictable. Citizens knew the rules, knew the punishments, and knew who held power. After its fall, unpredictability becomes the defining feature of daily life. Violence is no longer centralized but randomized, and survival depends less on obedience than on luck and proximity to power. For countless civilians, this transition feels less like liberation and more like abandonment. The familiar terror of imperial rule is replaced by the constant anxiety of lawlessness. At least under the Empire there were patrols, courts and infrastructure. After its collapse there are only rumours of distant heroes and the immediate reality of armed groups carving territory. The saga celebrates Endor with fireworks and music, yet that celebration is a narrative sleight of hand. It allows the audience to emotionally conclude the story before the consequences begin. Millions of beings wake up the next day without a functioning police force, without regulated trade, and without any guarantee that the next armed ship they see is friendly. This disconnect is not accidental. It reflects the mythic structure Star Wars draws from. Myths end with the dragon slain and the kingdom saved. But modern civilizations do not operate on mythic logic. They require continuity, bureaucracy, and compromise, none of which are provided by a single climactic victory. The removal of the Empire does not restore old democracies overnight because those democracies were already hollowed out. The Senate had been stripped of power long before it was dissolved. Local leaders had learned to survive through compliance rather than initiative, and when the central authority disappears, there is no muscle memory left for self-governance. As a result, power does not return to the people. It flows to whoever can organise violence the fastest, Former imperial officers become warlords, crime lords evolve into regional governors, and militias claim legitimacy through force, each filling a piece of the vacuum left behind. The heroes are rarely present for this phase. Their narrative function is complete. They are symbols of hope rather than managers of chaos. And so the galaxy they save becomes a place they no longer meaningfully inhabit, their absence allowing the post-war reality to metastasize unchecked. This pattern reveals a deeper truth about the saga. Star Wars is not a story about building better systems. It is a story about ending bad ones. And that distinction matters, because ending a system without replacing it guarantees instability, no matter how righteous the cause. The films subtly acknowledge this through tone shifts and background details, scattered references to unrest, remnants, and suffering. But they never confront it directly. Doing so would undermine the emotional payoff of victory and force the audience to grapple with the uncomfortable idea that the heroes may have made life worse for many in the short term. What emerges instead is a galaxy suspended between narratives. The old order is gone, the new order does not yet exist, and the space between is filled with violence, desperation, and opportunism, a liminal era that the saga repeatedly skips over, even as it shapes everything that follows. This unresolved aftermath becomes the soil in which future conflicts grow, not because evil magically returns, but because the conditions that allow it to thrive are left untouched: inequality, fear, fragmented authority, and the longing for someone strong enough to impose order. The tragedy is not that the heroes fail, it is that success itself is incomplete. Victory removes the visible tyrant but leaves behind the invisible machinery of collapse, and without deliberate effort to rebuild that machinery into something just and resilient, the galaxy is condemned to stumble forward blindly. This is the quiet cost of every celebration, the bill that comes due after the music fades. And it is here, in this unstable aftermath, that the seeds of repetition are planted, waiting patiently for the next ideology, the next strongman, or the next empire to promise safety at any cost. From this fragile moment, the long arc of consequence begins to bend, shaped not by triumph, but by neglect. And the question is no longer whether evil was defeated, but whether anything durable was built in its place. A question that echoes forward through time and demands to be confronted as the cycle tightens once again. What follows every collapse is not renewal but hesitation, and the New Republic emerges from this hesitation already compromised, defined less by what it wants to build and more by what it fears becoming. Its leaders haunted by the memory of imperial tyranny and determined to avoid repeating it at any cost, even if that cost is effectiveness. This fear shapes policy from the beginning. Centralized authority is treated as inherently suspect. Military strength is seen as a moral liability, and the very tools required to maintain galactic stability are dismantled in the name of virtue, leaving the Republic ideologically pure and structurally fragile. Rather than learning from the Empire's abuses while retaining its functional strengths, the New Republic reacts by hollowing itself out, demilitarizing fleets, decentralizing command, and trusting that goodwill and shared trauma will be enough to hold thousands of systems together across unimaginable distances. The result is a government that exists more as a symbol than a force, its Senate mired in procedure, its response times measured in months, and its authority dependent on voluntary compliance, a luxury that only exists in a galaxy where everyone agrees to behave, which history has repeatedly shown is never the case. Victory creates complacency, and complacency becomes doctrine, the belief that because the Emperor is gone, the conditions that created him are gone as well, allowing leaders to treat instability as an anomaly rather than an inevitability, and warning signs are dismissed as paranoia or warmongering. This mindset turns survival into stagnation, threats are debated instead of confronted, intelligence is questioned until it is irrelevant, and the Republic becomes reactive rather than proactive, always one step behind forces that have no such moral restraints slowing their momentum. While democratic systems struggle to balance freedom and security, remnants of the old regime face no such dilemma. Former imperials reorganize with clarity of purpose, shedding symbols but retaining structure, adapting ideology while preserving hierarchy, and exploiting the very freedoms their enemies refuse to police. Evil does not need legitimacy to grow. It only needs opportunity. And the vacuum left by a weakened republic provides exactly that, allowing movements like the First Order to gestate in the shadows, learning from the Empire's mistakes while benefiting from its survivors. The galaxy once again mistakes absence for peace. Border skirmishes and unexplained disappearances are treated as isolated incidents, and by the time the pattern becomes undeniable, the infrastructure required to stop it no longer exists in sufficient strength. This is where myth replaces accountability. Instead of examining policy failures and structural weaknesses, the galaxy clings to legends, waiting for the return of Luke Skywalker or the emergence of another chosen figure, placing faith in individuals rather than institutions. Heroes become emotional shortcuts, a way to avoid the slow, painful work of governance. If a hero exists, then responsibility can be deferred, problems can be postponed, and the belief persists that when things get bad enough, someone special will arrive to fix them. This dynamic infantilizes the galaxy, teaching entire civilizations to endure dysfunction rather than correct it, because correction requires consensus, sacrifice, and long-term thinking, while hero worship offers instant hope without obligation. The irony is that the heroes themselves often reject this role. Luke withdraws, burdened by failure. Rey inherits a legend she did not ask for, and the galaxy continues projecting salvation onto individuals who are neither equipped nor inclined to govern. Meanwhile, authoritarian movements adapt with frightening efficiency. They understand narrative. They weaponize nostalgia, promising the return of order, safety, and identity, reframing oppression as stability and fear as unity. These movements thrive precisely because democracies hesitate, debate, and doubt, qualities that are morally admirable but strategically vulnerable, especially in a post-war environment where populations are exhausted and desperate for certainty. Each cycle follows the same rhythm: collapse, chaos, reactionary rebuilding, complacency, and resurgence, not because the galaxy is incapable of learning, but because learning requires continuity, and continuity is the first casualty of every revolution. The galaxy never truly heals, because healing demands patience and investment, and Star Wars repeatedly shows a civilization that rushes from crisis to crisis without addressing the underlying fractures that make those crises inevitable. What appears as peace is merely a pause, a momentary lull where wounds are unexamined and systems remain brittle, waiting for pressure to reveal their weaknesses once more. This is why the next war always feels sudden to those living through it. They mistake the absence of open conflict for resolution, unaware that the conditions for violence have been quietly rebuilding all along. The saga frames this repetition as tragedy, yet it is also a form of commentary, a recognition that defeating evil is easier than sustaining good, and that moral clarity in battle does not translate into moral clarity in governance. Star Wars becomes, at its core, a story about cycles rather than conclusions, about the difficulty of breaking patterns, when victory itself reinforces the illusion that the work is finished. The Force seeks balance, but balance is not stasis. It is constant adjustment, and the galaxy consistently fails not because it chooses darkness, but because it stops tending the fragile structures that keep darkness at bay. In the end, the greatest enemy is not the Sith, the Empire, or any singular villain. It is neglect, the belief that once evil is defeated, goodness will maintain itself, a belief proven false every time the cycle resets. The final irony is that hope survives not because the galaxy learns, but because individuals continue to resist despair, even as the systems around them remain broken, a testament to resilience but also to endless repetition. The wars never truly end. They only change names, uniforms, and symbols, because the underlying failure to replace fallen systems with durable, just alternatives remains unresolved. Star Wars does not offer an escape from this reality. It reflects it, using myth to soften a truth that is deeply uncomfortable, that without intentional rebuilding, every victory carries the seeds of the next defeat. And so the saga closes not with an ending, but with a question that echoes across generations, whether the galaxy will ever learn to build something that lasts, or whether it is forever destined to celebrate, forget, and repeat.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.